This is the Morning Catch-Up with your host Finch and Nomtebo. Welcome to another exciting episode.
Hello everyone, Sanibonani Dumelangi Molweni. This is Nomtebo Konoti, also known as Rasta. Some call me Wabi Sabi. Welcome yet again to another episode of the Morning Catch-Up. I'm not alone. Today I'm with my co-host, who is shortly about to introduce themselves. Vanilla, over to you.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much again for tuning in. You know what time it is. It is the Morning Catch-Up. And in today's exciting episode, we're going to be talking to, we need drum rolls for this. Drum rolls, please. We have Yvette Hardie in the show today, so you know it's going to be an exciting show. We're going to be talking everything about children's theatre, education, and everything you would like to know also about Yvette. So welcome, Yvette. Thank you so much for joining into the show.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Before we start, can I do this little intro? So yes, as we said, we have Yvette Hardie. And before I get into it or go any further, I need to do a proper introduction. So
Yes.
She is a theatre director, a producer, an educator, arts advocate. She is the director of ASSITEJ SA, and she served as president of ASSITEJ SA from the year 2011 to 2021, networking across 100 countries. She was responsible for hosting the 19th ASSITEJ World Congress and Cradle of Creativity Festival for the first time in Africa. In 2017, she's also valued for her work in arts education, having written national curricula and textbooks for dramatic creative arts, and has taught widely within secondary and tertiary contexts. I know that was a lot, but we are going to give her some time to give us more and tell us more about herself. But I couldn't leave out that informative information.
Definitely.
So thank you. Over to you, Yvette.
Hi. Well, what do you want to know? I mean, there are a lot of that I've been involved with over the years, obviously. But what's been driving me all this time has been a passion for theatre and a passion for children and young people, and to seeing them develop, as fully and as completely as they can. And I really believe that the arts have such an important role to play in that. So for me, it brings me great joy to be involved in an organization like ASSITEJ, where all these things are coming together in very exciting ways.
That's exciting. That's exciting. I think also just moving deeper into education for children. A lot of us, especially young facilitators, you've just graduated, you've just come out of university. Why is it so important then to kind of hone in on children? What does it mean for example, we want to know in terms of children's development, how do they develop into understanding how to work with other people? Why is it so important in terms of a child's development to actually go into art and into theatre?
Well, I think that children exist actually in the world of the arts naturally. When children are born, they experience everything through their senses. They learn through their senses. It's through seeing, through listening, through touching, through feeling, through tasting, that they become aware of the world around them, that they form relationships, that they start to experiment. And as they get a little bit older, they start to engage in play of all kinds. And that play is really the beginning of the creativity that leads to the arts. Children naturally want to explore through drawing, through dancing, through funny sounds. You think about the kind of hilarity that children have when they hear nonsense poetry, for example, or, you know, made up languages, and, you know, the kind of delight that children have in that. They are so open, they are so aware of the world around them, because they're needing to learn everything that can be learned in a very, very short space of time. And their processing capacities, I mean, the way their brains are working is extraordinary. I mean, they are working way better and in more sophisticated ways than we are as adults. They're making far more connections. So, and they do that very naturally through the arts. And that process continues through, you know, until they basically reach school. And unfortunately, the way our schooling has developed over centuries is that it is the antithesis of creativity and play. And in fact, it is trying to fit every child into a particular straitjacket of understanding through verbal communication and through mathematical literacy, essentially. You know, everything is in one of those two streams at school, whereas a child's capacities are far more varied than that. You know, children are natural gymnasts, they're natural experimenters, they're natural actors, because they are constantly making up stories and events and testing things out in the real world. And that's how they learn best. So I really feel that we have a responsibility as people working in the arts with children and young people to be able to sustain that for as long as possible for them, to give them access to experiences where they will be able to activate all those other parts of themselves. And ultimately, I think we need to be changing the education system. And the way the education system needs to be changing is in terms of an incorporation of the arts and right throughout the system. So it's not just about studying the arts to be an artist. It's actually about working with the arts as a way of knowing and being in the world. And there have been so many studies which have shown just how important this can be for children's development, but also for their sense of creating a community, for their mental health, for their sense of identity. There are just so many aspects that the arts serve better than formal education. So as ASSITEJ, you know, we always talk about our 4 pillars, and essentially those 4 pillars come together around creating access to the arts for children, empowering education through the arts, supporting the artists to be able to make that access and that empowerment happen, and then connecting all of us together into a single effort so that we can make sure that children and young people have the kind of access that they need. So, you know, for me, it is vital that children have access to the arts, and they should have it from the earliest possible age.
That is so interesting. That is so interesting. I just want to know, what transformations have you witnessed in the lives of the children and young people through your theatrical initiatives?
I mean, there's so many. It's difficult to, you know, choose just 1 or 2 stories, but you know, from children who felt incredibly alienated. So I think about one particular instance where a child who did have he was both deaf, and he also had a physical handicap. And so he was quite alienated within his school and within his group. But when through an arts program, he was able to discover how he was a natural artist, and how he, in fact, despite these, you know, seeming disabilities, he had tremendous talent. And in that talent, he was able to build his confidence, and his relationship with everybody in his peer group completely changed. And he became a kind of a leader. So you see a child going from a position of powerlessness or of feeling, you know, alienated, to feeling connected, to feeling engaged, and to having a sense of purpose. And, you know, there are many, many examples of that. What we also see is how children often deal with difficult subjects, things which might have happened to them or that are troubling them, through the arts. So, you know, it can be any number of things. Right now, we're engaged with a project around gender-based violence and around violence against children. And we're doing that with the Nelson Mandela Children's Foundation. And what I'm really excited about it with that project is that we know the scourge of violence that happens in our country. We know that children and young people are subject to that they see it, they experience it, you know, it happens to them directly, or it happens to the people in their family. and they carry trauma as a result of that. And this project is going to allow them to really work through those things using the arts, because the arts can be both a space of healing, but also a space of kind of, I guess, empowerment, in the sense of allowing one to realize that one doesn't have to be a victim, that one can make different choices. And you have a chance using the arts to experiment with what those choices might be, or to replay events in a way that where you can kind of be in control of them. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what the impact of that project is going to be, and we're going to be monitoring that one really, really closely. But it ranges, you know, so many different examples, just from people finding sheer joy through a theatre experience, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember one example from years back now is in with the War Horse project, when we had this incredible production, War Horse, with these amazing life-sized horse puppets in it, touring South Africa. It was a collaboration between the Royal Shakespeare Company and Handspring Puppet Company. And we were responsible for bringing 5,000 children to see that production.
Wow.
But we also did a number of workshops before the production and after the production, because we knew that for many children, they didn't even know what the First World War was. You know, they didn't know that horses were used in the war. They didn't know anything about the war. And we were concerned that they would come to this production and be kind of alienated by accents and, you know, strange events that they didn't necessarily connect with. And so we did a lot of workshops which were about playing, not necessarily telling what was going to happen or anything like that, but playing with some of the ideas that would be in the piece to make it more engaging. So one of the things that I remember being really amazing was this production of War Horse that was touring South Africa, and it was some years back now, but it was an incredible production with these life-size horse puppets. It was a collaboration between the RSC and the Handspring Puppet Company. And ASSITEJ was able to take 5,000 children to see this production. But we did some workshops before and after the production with the children, because we realized that you know, they weren't necessarily going to understand the production if they were just to see it by themselves without any kind of engagement. They didn't know anything about the First World War. They didn't know that horses were used in the war. They wouldn't have understood the accents, you know. And we didn't want children to be alienated by it. So we did these workshops where we introduced them through very playful, engaging drama type and dance type activities to some of the themes and some of the ideas that they would experience in the production. And it was incredibly successful. And one of the things that I remember from that is a boy, he must have been about 14, coming out after the play and realizing that the play was based on a book called War Horse by Michael Morpurgo, and there were copies of the book in the foyer. And he raced over to the book and he grabbed it. He said, "I've got to have this. I've got to have this." And his teacher was like, "Wow." And she bought it, and he'd never read a book before, but he devoured this book because he'd just seen the play and he loved it so much. And he was so excited by it, you know. So for me, and also, I mean, that performance was quite electric. I mean, the way the children responded to it was just extraordinary. But for me, that's kind of what theatre does. It opens up new parts of yourself, you know. It allows you to see your own possibility potentially, and then to be able to follow that. So it's not just about becoming an actor or becoming a dancer or whatever, you know. I think parents always have the impression that when we say that we need arts for children, that we're saying that their children should go into a career in the arts, and that's not what we're saying at all. Everybody should have access to the arts.
Yeah.
That is.
Yvette, I just want to go back to what you began talking about in terms of creative play and talking also about the education system. What kind of suggestions then would you give kind of like schools on how to change their system so that it not enforces, but it kind of adapts and gives more accessibility to the arts and theatre? For example, I'm talking about instead of schools just having like an arts and culture class, how does the whole class then become, how does the whole school and my education journey as a 6-year-old, as a 10-year-old, how does it become more how does it invite me more into the arts instead of me just going to one class?
So one of the concepts that we're working on at the moment is something called arts-rich schools. And really what ASSITEJ is trying to do is to find ways to embed the arts in schools in a variety of ways. So as you say, it's not just about what's happening in the curriculum. Yes, we do have compulsory creative arts as a subject. And yes, we can in some schools take, you know, dramatic arts or dance or music as a subject right through to matric. But it's not just about that. It's also about how do we use the arts as method for everything else? How do we ensure that there's a strong after-school program which is involving the arts so that if you are keen on music or dance or drama or the visual arts, whatever it is, you're able to really pursue that and hone it and work on it. How do we connect the school into the community through the arts? You know, either through bringing in community artists who can be kind of almost patrons of the school or champions of the arts within the school, bringing in Indigenous knowledge holders in the local area, also taking the arts to the parents, taking the arts out into the community so that, you know, many of our parents have never really experienced the arts themselves. So we have a huge opportunity in schools because we are meeting parents, we're meeting community members, we're meeting grandparents to really give them an experience of the arts, whether it's through choir or an art exhibition or through children performing or, you know, whatever it is. So really to make the arts a kind of a strategy for the school that is part of every part of thinking about how the school works. I think it needs to start in early childhood education. And frankly, I think any good early childhood practitioner knows that the arts are the way to work with children. Unfortunately, in South Africa, we have many ECDs or spaces that are childcare spaces where we do not have qualified teachers in those spaces. We have people who are more very loving, caring people in many instances, but they are more like childminders. They don't necessarily have an understanding of childhood development. And so they don't necessarily understand the value of the arts. And sometimes they even start to teach the way they were taught at primary school in the ECD setting, which is very problematic because children don't need that kind of engagement at that stage. They need to have structured play, free play, creativity, you know, they need to be using the arts. So I think that part of what we need to be doing is we need to be embedding these skills like across the board in those spaces. So collaboration, for example, with Department of Social Development, the Department of Basic Education, which now has authority over early childhood development, with the various NGOs that do work in that space, making the connections between the arts and literacy, the arts and numeracy, you know, the arts and well-being. And then from a primary school point of view, we need to ensure that the teachers that are in the system that are teaching creative arts are really skilled creative arts facilitators. And if they're not, they need to be supported. And that's part of the work that we do. We provide artists from the community who we've trained to understand the curriculum better, to work with those teachers and support them and help them build that arts-rich environment. But it also goes beyond that, beyond those teachers, because what we also need are for the maths teachers, the science teachers, the history teachers, the language teachers to understand the value of the arts. And that might mean team teaching, it might mean collaboration, it might mean more project-based learning. So, you know, instead of us thinking about keeping these subjects in silos, finding ways to bring subjects together where we can use the arts as a methodology to bring different learning into the same spaces. I think there's a huge amount of potential in this area. And I was really excited and very lucky to be able to do some research recently on the role of culture and arts education for sustainable development. And of course, one of the sustainable development goals is quality education. And so it was really looking at how we can use the arts and culture more broadly in arts education and in education to uplift what is happening across the board. And we were focused particularly on Africa, the Caribbean states, and the Pacific, and looking at case studies from those places to see what people are already doing, you know, and how innovative they are. And there are amazing projects that are happening. So, you know, I feel like we're at a bit of a turning point in terms of education. We've got an opportunity to perhaps start to shift people's minds about how we educate. There's a lot of push now behind this idea that we need to have a more holistic approach to education, and we need to be part of that, you know, and be providing the evidence for it as well.